When I started work for the Ministry of Defense's UFO program in 1991, I really didn't know much about the subject at all. I didn't have any particular views on it either way, actually. So I came in with an open mind, blank sheet of paper, really determined just to go where the data took me. And I think looking back, that was probably the best way to come in. I don't think it would have been a good idea to put somebody in there who was either a true believer or a diehard skeptic. So I think I had that advantage in a sense. And really, as I went on, and this was a 3-year posting in a much wider 21-year Ministry of Defense career. But as I went through that posting over the next 3 years, my thinking, I think it's fair to say, evolved on this. Firstly, as I delved back into the archive of files, which we had dating back to the 50s, with actually one or two from the earlier than that in the Second World War, even during bombing raids. But so as I did that, and also, of course, as I did the day-to-day job, which was investigating the new sighting reports that came in, and of course the whole reason for having this program was not because there was any corporate belief in extraterrestrial visitation, but simply part and parcel of the Ministry of Defense's wider effort to, at any given time, be absolutely clear what's going on in the United Kingdom's air defense region. So we came at this from a national security, from a defense point of view. If there's something flying, we want to know whose it is and what it's doing, what its capabilities are. And of course, against the background of the Cold War, we were thinking, obviously, could this be something Russian? But we didn't entirely rule out the other possibilities, but that was the mindset. So as I did all those things, gradually my views began to change. And I, from coming in thinking, well, it's probably just going to turn out to be aircraft lights or weather balloons, but let's see. I came away thinking, my goodness, some of that was really interesting. Sightings from our own pilots, radar operators, speeds and maneuvers that seemed quite extraordinary. And so it was a real eye-opener.
That sounds like it. And, what are your thoughts that kind of leads into about the current revelations, starting with, the New York Times, pretty well publicized, released an article indicating that, the Pentagon had a group investigating this phenomenon where they claimed they didn't since Blue Book. And along with those revelations, as you described, pilot testimony, not only that, but pilot video from cockpit fighters and radar corroboration. What are your thoughts about the 2017 revelations to date?
Well, I think what we've seen in the last 3 years is this subject coming out of the fringe and into the mainstream. And I think going back a little over 3 years to December 2017, the New York Times published this story. They revealed the existence of a formerly unknown Pentagon program known as ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And in association with that, the Times also revealed the existence of some videos purporting to show US Navy jets chasing UFOs, or rather UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, which is the phrase that we use in government, certainly. And it's a phrase, we didn't invent it in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, but we popularized it in the early 90s when I was there. And recent US government statements have confirmed, yes, we borrowed it from the Brits. So these twin revelations, I think, moved this subject forward considerably. And in association with that, there was a raft of other related revelations. It turned out the Navy said that they had issued guidance to their pilots, telling them what to do if they encounter these things, but they refused to actually release the specific guidance itself because they said it was classified. Congress, understandably, said, wait a minute, you told us that nobody had been interested in this or investigating since end of 69 when Project Blue Book was terminated. What's going on? The Defense Intelligence Agency wrote to Congress, giving a list of 38 scientific and technical studies that had been done under the ATIP program. Now, they tried to spin this as being about next generation aerospace threats to the US. But when you look down that list, there was nothing about Russia. There was nothing about China, nothing about North Korea, nothing about Iran. It was all advanced theoretical physics about deep space travel. So the sorts of propulsion systems and things that you'd need really for interstellar travel, and the sort of technology that if we are being visited, UFOs would employ. And this went into anti-gravity, invisibility, warp drive, wormholes, and there was even a paper on the Drake equation, the only purpose of which is to estimate the number of communicable civilizations in our Milky Way galaxy. So if this was about next generation threats from Russia and China in relation to aviation, why on earth would the Drake equation be in there? So quite understandably, people are saying, look, this has nothing to do with Russia or China. This is extraterrestrials they're interested in. And sure enough, Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader who was instrumental in setting up the program, said, yeah, sure, this was a UFO program. Luis Elizondo, the intelligence official who was stewarding this work, he said exactly the same thing. So we've got ATIP, the US Navy videos, the guidance, the congressional interest, and that morphed into congressional briefings, by the way, both in Senate and the House, Armed Services Committee and Intelligence Committee. And most recently, of course, the revelation that the Senate Intelligence Committee demanded a report on this from DNI, Director of National Intelligence. They said that they wanted this within 180 days of enactment of the Intelligence Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2021, but that wasn't going to get through. So it got tagged on to the COVID-19 relief bill, enacted on December 27th, 2020. It's not the first time that there's been sighting reports from pilots or radar operators. And it's not the first time that there have been films out there. I mean, yes, it is true that the Department of Defense have perhaps been unprecedented in issuing 2 now press releases about this. The first saying that those 3 US Navy videos are real, and the second confirming the setting up of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. But it's not the first time that, and no one's pretending there are just 3 cases that where military pilots have seen these things. So inevitably, fascinating though that is, it's my time doing this for government that has had the more impact. And I think it's not necessarily any specific thing, a case or an incident or a conversation with any particular individual. I think it was the mindset that it gave me. An awful lot of people are interested in this subject and do it. I don't mean to be, disparaging or sure, disrespectful, but do it as a private interest. I mean, almost like as a hobby.
Yep.
And very few people have had the sort of inside access that I've had the privilege, I suppose, of having, just through luck, really. I of all the jobs, of all the postings that could have opened up at the precise moment when I was due to be moved, I could have ended up doing pension policy. I could have been doing the tri-service study into the new integrated military boot, or whatever. But so it was just luck. But through whatever combination of circumstance, I found myself there. And having that insider's perspective, I think, is something that very few people have had the privilege of having. And it made me look at this through the lens of threat assessment. And so, for example, maybe a lot of the public don't realize that threat is actually defined in the military and the intelligence community as being a product of capability and intent. So I look at the UFO phenomenon, and I automatically try and apply that capability intent matrix, as it were, and say, well, what do we know about the capability? Actually, through imagery, intelligence, through measurement and signature intelligence, through a number of other means, we have some quite interesting data on capability. I mentioned earlier, speeds and maneuvers that seem to go significantly ahead of anything that we have in our inventory. What we don't have really is any, I would say, credible information on intent. We do have some interesting alien contact, alien abduction cases where people claim to have received messages or have some sort of insight into what the extraterrestrial agenda is, but we don't really know. We don't really have a way of evaluating that information. It falls back on the old intelligence analyst almost joke, interesting if true. We don't even know, even if these people are being sincere, whether what they're being shown or told or what they're perceiving does genuinely equate to what happened, or whether it's just their perception. Sometimes maybe twisted and altered, either by whatever the source is, or by the lens of the regression hypnosis that a lot of people use to try and bring this information out in the first place. So again, long story short, we really don't have any credible data on what intent is. So intent is unknown. Capability seems very high. And Senator Marco Rubio, speaking to this, said, I'd rather we were dealing with aliens, because frankly, if this was the Russians or the Chinese, they've made a quantum leap in technological advance that has left the United States standing. And that isn't a cause, obviously, of extreme concern. So you throw all this into this threat matrix, and you're left with an unknown. You can't say whether or not there's a threat because you don't have one of the values, i.e. intent. And in that circumstance, it's always more prudent to assume there's a threat and be relieved when one doesn't materialize than assume there's no threat and get badly caught out if one suddenly arises. So that's, I think, where we are with this. And to go back to the question, that's why my time in the Ministry of Defense looking at this has been more illuminating than these extraordinary recent developments, because it has given me that insider perspective on how governments handle this subject in terms of policy. I mean, the casework is fascinating, but it's the policy that really drives this in terms of where we are and where we're going to end up.
Sure. That was great. That was illuminating. And you touched on something in there about the abduction phenomena. And that kind of leads me to my final question. As I alluded to earlier in the conversation, we're looking at documenting an area within the UFO phenomenon, and that is the abduction phenomena. We've got a few people who are, if you're into this, are fairly high profile, and we're going to be documenting their stories. And so I wonder, have you, with your time at the MOD, had any cases that involved abduction reports, and what was your thoughts on those?
We certainly received some alien contact, alien abduction, whatever phraseology you want to use, some of those sorts of cases at the Ministry of Defense. Now, it was difficult in terms of our remit. Our terms of reference were fairly narrowly defined as researching and investigating the UFO phenomenon to determine whether there was evidence of a potential threat or an actual threat to the defense of the United Kingdom, and to ascertain if there was any other information in the phenomenon that might be of more general defense or scientific interest. So it was difficult, though not impossible, to justify really looking closely at abductions. But the other point was, we didn't get that many reports, frankly. I think a couple of reasons. Firstly, to a lot of people, we were the villains here. A lot of people believe that governments are involved in a cover-up of the UFO phenomenon, and therefore, by extension, the alien abduction phenomenon. And so I think a lot of times people who had these experiences thought, well, why should I report them to the bad guys? And following on from that, a lot of people thought we already knew about it already, going back to the point about complicity. But we did get cases. I did meet some people. I did take some of these accounts and, see whether there was anything to them. But frankly, the problem I had was firstly, we were, as I say, very much at the fringe, at the outer limits of our terms of reference. And my goodness, the political firestorm that would have arisen had I started, for example, using regression hypnosis on any of these people, which has its problems and its controversies anyway. Of course, a lot of people in the psychological, psychiatric community say that it can obscure memories, distort them, even create false memories. But even setting that aside, the Ministry of Defense policy was always to downplay the scope of our involvement, even in UFOs. So if it had come out that we were delving deeply or even delving at all into alien abductions, the potential for the Secretary of Defense and other senior personnel was huge in terms of potential embarrassment. So I had to tread extremely carefully with this. So we have a few reports on file, but frankly, in terms of what people would call meaningful research and investigation, no, we didn't really go down that road. That was something I occasionally was able to blur the lines and get involved more in a personal capacity. But going back to the point about data, I suppose actionable intelligence that came from this was very, very little, if indeed any at all. I mean, not to dismiss testimony. We shouldn't dismiss testimony. Eyewitness testimony, after all, lies at the heart still, even in these days of forensics and cameras, CCTV. Eyewitness testimony lies at the heart of our criminal justice system to this day, and rightly so. But it is difficult. With UFOs, we have not just the testimony, but we have radar data, we have IMINT, we have MASINT, we have satellite data. With the abductees, it's much more difficult. I think, if I can quote Close Encounters of the Third Kind, these are ordinary people in extraordinary situations. I know that the late John Mack, who I knew and met on several occasions, he certainly, as a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, found no evidence of psychopathology in any of the people that he looked at. I mean, he felt that they were being generally truthful, and he felt that there was some sort of phenomenon involved, but quite what it is, I think he certainly flirted with the idea of it being extraterrestrial in a physical, well, I hasten to use, I'm reluctant to use this word, real, but real fashion. maybe he walked it back somewhat. I don't know whether that's because his views evolved. He was a deeply spiritual person, of course, or whether it was a reaction to the adverse situation he found himself in with some of his colleagues at Harvard. Ralph Blumenthal goes into a lot of that in his new book on John Mack. So there are a lot of factors at play here. I certainly don't dismiss any of this. I don't think we should be in the business of dismissing data simply because it sounds difficult to believe. A lot of things in our history sound difficult to believe and turned out to be absolutely true. Stones falling from the sky, for example, and in historical times, in medieval times, the Middle Ages, this was dismissed. But of course, now we know that these things are just meteorites. So, and many other examples too. So there is a whole wealth of interesting information with the abductees. It is data, even though a lot of it's testimony, even though we need to, I think, come to some sort of informed consensus on regression hypnosis and its use or not, as the case may be. And if there is anything to some of the stories that I've heard about implants, then that's probably the way forward, because that's testable. And it's perfectly possible to write up something, a paper for a peer-reviewed journal like Science or Nature or Scientific American. So there is some science that can be done here. Some people claim, we've had a look at some of these things. Well, the challenge is there. I think get it into the hands of people who can do that. Now, you face then immediately the counter argument that maybe the scientific community will be complicit in a cover-up, or maybe the government will get to that material before it can be put in the hands of people. So, there's a long and complicated debate to be had about this, but I've met a lot of these people over the years. Some when I was doing this at the Ministry of Defense, most of them subsequently to that in a private capacity. I think the vast majority of them are sincere and truthful. That's not to say that there aren't obviously the odd cases where we are dealing with either people who are making it up, or people who do have some sort of psychopathology, or people whose memories have been implanted somehow, either by regression hypnosis or just by suggestibility. There are very vivid dreams, there are hallucinations. So there are, as with UFOs, most of this is probably going to turn out to have a prosaic explanation. But as I often say, with UFOs, and absolutely, of course, the same applies with alien abductions, the skeptics have to be right every day. The believers only have to be right once.
Well put. Thank you so much, Nick. And listen, I've a funny story. I'll wrap up with this. So I'm driving my daughter to dance this morning. She's 13. And I'm excited because I'm going to talk to Nick Pope this afternoon. So I took the opportunity on this 20-minute drive to dance to give her the Nick Pope biography, right? And as we pull up to dance, 20 minutes, and I just was wrapping up my eloquent Nick Pope biography. And I looked at her, and she looked up to me, and she was thoroughly unimpressed. She just thinks she's got a weird dad. But for me, it would be the equivalent of someone that follows basketball, and I get a chance to talk to Michael Jordan. So for me, it's a big deal. And I really, really appreciate you made some concessions to do this. And again, I greatly appreciate it. I'll let you get back to your family, and I'll let you get back to your weekend.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation. I think we covered a lot of fascinating ground, and please send my warmest regards to your daughter. I quite understand the point that, some people are absolutely fascinated about UFOs, and to other people, it's just a complete non-issue, but that's fine. I think that's what makes us human, is that we have these individual things. And she probably loves all sorts of other things like music or dance, obviously. And long may it be. Vive la différence. I mean, to me personally, of course, one of the reasons that I'm interested and stay interested long after I stop doing this for the government is that, to me, the question of whether or not we're alone in the universe and the related question of whether we're being visited, those are some of the biggest and most profound questions I think we can ask. And unlike some of the other big profound questions, like, is there a God, or does consciousness survive death, which are perhaps unknowable in our lifetimes or untestable from a scientific, empirical point of view, I think the question of alien life is something that we may well quickly and easily, with the advances in technology that we're making, be able to get. So that's why I'm still interested.
Yeah, and I'm just thrilled to talk to you personally about it. I follow your work, and I'll continue to follow your work. And then conversely, anything we uncover that's of interest, I'll definitely keep you posted on that, Nick.
Well, thank you very much. I wish you every success. You and your colleagues who are working on all this, wish you every success with your research and your investigations, and indeed with your film to document this. So good luck.
Thanks again, Nick. I really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you.
Take care.